We've all thought about it. Getting rid of the Strombergs, bolting on a pair of Dellortos, right? If you've got the Strombergs, you've thought about it. Everybody has. So we're going to dive into today. We're going to talk about Dellorto carburetors used on the Lotus Esprit. We're also going to dive into the relationship between Dellorto and Lotus, how that developed, how that started, how it evolved. And, you know, if you just want to hang around to level up your Dellorto carburetor knowledge, how the carburetors evolved with the different models of Esprit over the year, then you've come to the right place. So hang on, because we're going to talk Dellortos today. All right, let's set the stage. Mid-1970s, right? Lotus comes out with the iconic Lotus Esprit S1, captivating audiences all over the world. Car enthusiasts love the design. It was a beautiful, beautiful car. Under the hood, here was the question. How is Lotus going to balance performance with efficiency? Enter Dellorto carburetors in the DHLA series. These gave Lotus everything they were looking for. They had the performance they were required, and Dellorto was willing to work with Lotus to make modifications to these to increase performance even more than their standard off-the-shelf items. Now, the majority of Lotus cars all came with a DHLA 45 of one type or another. However, there was one in there, there was an oddball. There was a DHLA 40, and it's not on the car you think it would be on. It's not the S1. The 40 didn't come out until around 1980, and they used it through 1987. So we're going to talk about those a little bit more as well. Okay, so the goal here today is to talk about the different Lotus Esprit model years, look at the carburetors, determine which carburetors came on which cars, so we know, is it appropriate to put one type on another? We're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about how to identify the carburetors. There's Lotus part numbers. There are tags on the different carburetors on the top of them. And then there's also the designation of the carburetor itself. Most of Lotus carburetors had a specific suffix that followed the DHLA 45. We're going to talk about those today. And progression holes. One of the big changes over the years happened in the progression holes. These were done for a couple reasons. Number one, to meet emission standards. As always, Lotus was always struggling with that. But the second was because the original Lotus engine had a hard time transitioning from idle phase to main jet system. And the progression holes helped provide a more consistent fuel delivery to the car, to the engine, during that transition phase, and it took some of the stumbling out of the otherwise stock DHLA 45 carburetor. All right, a little quick history on Dellorto. So Dellorto's been around for a long time. They started off making motorcycle carburetors, and then it was like in the 60s, they switched over to doing side draft carburetors for automobiles. Their goal was to produce a carburetor that outperformed the good old Weber right here. And they succeeded in many ways. You know, the choke system on the Dellorto carburetors, I would argue, is better than that on the Weber carburetors. They're very easy to modify. You can get into them quickly. You can change jets. You can change emulsion tubes. You can do that on the Weber too. But great carburetor. I think they did a fantastic job. And it led to Lotus ultimately choosing Dellorto to move forward with all their production cars. All right, so we know Lotus chose Dellorto carburetors. And why did they choose them? Well, these babies had superior airflow, and they had the tuning flexibility Lotus was looking for. The DHLA series carburetors had better adaptability, they had smoother progressions than some of the competitors, and it just worked well with what Lotus was trying to do. Additionally, Dellorto's willingness to collaborate with Lotus on a lot of the special configurations Lotus had moving forward through the years really sealed the deal. Special configurations like the modification of the progression holes, adding additional progression holes to help that transition from the idle circuit to the main circuit, to reduce the stumbling of the car. They also, when Lotus went to the turbocharged cars, they had to seal the float bowl. It was pressurized to balance the pressure of the turbocharged system with what was happening inside the carburetor. Otherwise, it just wouldn't suck any fuel. So Dellorto was willing to work with them on that, and it really solidified the relationship between the two. And that relationship lasted all the way up through 1992 when Lotus put the last set of Dellorto carburetors on a Lotus Esprit, the naturally aspirated 1992 Esprit. That was it. After that, it was all fuel injection. All right, I always find it best to try, when I understand something, to kind of see the big picture first, right? So when we're talking Dellortos on Lotus Esprits, let's break it down, because there were a lot of variants over the years. So I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about the body, which is just the carburetor itself. And if you look at the designation, this one, for example, is a DHLA 45E. So I would consider, all right, this is a 45E body, right? Lotus used 4 different carburetor bodies over the years. They started with the E. That was on the S1, the S2, and some early 912s. And then they went to the 40H. Now, I don't have a 40H. This is a disassembled 40. It's a little smaller right here. They used the 40 on the Turbo 910 from 1980 to 1987. However, I think it was only in the UK they used that model. And then they went to a 45M. Now, that was on a high compression turbo. The 45M had this sealed float bowl, right? It was pressurized. So that was the third variant. And the final variant they used was the 45D. And that was a much later Lotus Esprit, high compression, 912, naturally aspirated. Those are the 4 body types. Now, they took each one of those body types and they modified the internals. So, in other words, the 45E appears in 4 different configurations on different Lotus Esprits. The differences being, sometimes they messed with the choke size inside. Sometimes they messed with the main jets. They messed with the emulsion tubes. They messed with the starter jet. Basically, they put it on the engine and they tested it and they modified it to get that particular engine to run at optimal performance. So when we talk about the 45E body, again, you can't just go buy a 45E and slap it on your car. You got to look inside and see what's in there and make sure it's appropriate for your particular engine. They did the same thing with the 45M. There were different variants of that, and it was just based on the internals. But they all had the same external 45M body. And then the 45D might have been a one-off. I know the 40H was a one-off. They only used it one time. So all in all, I think if you talk about the bodies and configurations, I think overall there was 8 to 10 different variations of carburetors that Lotus used throughout the years. All right, let's talk about something that matters. Let's talk about the correct Dellortos for the correct car. You have a 1977, 1978, 1979 Lotus Esprit, and it has Strombergs on it, and you want to switch to Dellortos. You know, a lot of guys they just have the DHLA 45 stuck in their head. They're like, go get some 45s, stick them on, you're good to go. Well, hang on a second. Lotus actually didn't put the DHLA 45 on the Esprit. They didn't put it on any car. They made modifications to it. And the modifications are identified through the suffix of the carburetor name. So in other words, this is a DHLA 45, a standard 45, no modifications. Great carburetor for race cars, performs outstandingly well at high RPMs. However, Lotus was struggling with low RPMs. And this carburetor was causing hesitation with low RPMs. So Lotus needed a fix. Working with Dellorto, they determined that they needed some additional progression holes. They needed to help lean out that fuel delivery at low RPMs and have a smoother transition as it switched over from the idle jet circuit to the main jet circuit. So Lotus worked with Dellorto, they put in the progression holes, it smoothed out that transition. In addition, they had to meet emission requirements, and those progression holes helped with emissions as well. So if you're looking to put Dellortos on an early Esprit, you want to find a set of DHLA 45E carburetors. It's got to have the suffix E. And the significance of that is the number of progression holes. These have 6 progression holes. And you know, you can see them. You look right down there in the carburetor body, they're right up there. You probably can't see it on the camera, but they are there. But it gets a little tricky, right? So you got a DHL 45E. Let's say you acquire a set. You think you're good to go. You throw them on. You're not good to go. You got to check what's inside of them. Because Lotus used the DHL 45E on 3 different variants of cars. And each one was slightly different. How are they different? Well, the emulsion tubes, the jets, the tuning on the inside of the carburetor was different for each one. They even changed the choke sizes over the years. So just because you get your hands on a set of DHLA 45E doesn't mean you're good to go yet. You got to dive inside and you got to compare what's inside your carburetor to what Lotus initially had required for the carburetor for that particular car. Is it a bad idea to put a DHLA 45 on your car? Forget about the suffixes, right? Just the straight up original 45. Because there's a lot more of these floating around than there are the suffix configurations like the 45E, the H, the M, the D. They're really, really hard to find. Good luck, right? The E's, I think, are probably the easiest to find. If you're looking for a 40H or a 45M or a 40D, that's a tough find. So can you put a 45 on your car? Well, not if it's turbo, because it's not a pressurized float ball, right? So you can only put it on the naturally aspirated car. Can you put it on an S1 and S2? If you're looking to dump the old Strombergs, and you want to go with a Dellorto, and you see a set of 45s, but it's not an E, there's no suffix, what do? You buy it? Yeah, you can buy it. So the 45 is a great carburetor for high RPMs, like I said in the beginning of this video. To make up for the stumbling with the lack of additional progression holes at low RPM, you can play with that, right? You can start to change some jets. You can make it a little richer as you go through that progression. There's some things you can do to improve the performance. Will you get rid of all of the stumble? Probably not. It won't be as smooth as a 45E. However, at high RPMs, you'll have a lively engine. It may even perform better than a 45E if you're out on the track or you're just driving around at 5,000, 6,000 RPMs. Then it's going to perform quite well for you, and you can play around with the internals and you can make it work. So should you just run away from a 45? I wouldn't. I say it's still got a place on the car. You just got to be prepared to spend some time to really dial it in the way you want it based on how you drive. Okay, I promised I'd talk about part numbers and tag numbers for the Dellorto carburetors. I'm looking at a page out of the S3 service manual related to the carburetors, and you can see here there's a line for the Lotus part number and a tag number. And they have part numbers for the front and the rear carburetor and tag numbers for the front and rear carburetor. And also, if you look at the line right below it, they also did a paint spot on the carburetors. Now imagine that was to help the folks on the assembly line quickly identify which carburetors were which specification, so they put them on the right car. I've never seen those paint marks survive. They seem to have all worn off over time. So your next best bet is to look for a tag. And these would be the tag numbers that you would see on your carburetor, and they would help you identify which spec car those carburetors came from. All right, if you're looking for a tag, these are the tags. So that's the part number associated with the tag that you found in the service manual. So you can refer to this as well. So if you don't have a paint dot on your carburetor and you don't have a tag, the only way to really know what's inside of it is to open it up and look at the jets and look at the choke and the emulsion tubes and then match it up with the service manual to kind of find out what you have. All right, let's do a quick rundown of the different variations. So we'll start with naturally aspirated cars, 1976 to 1987. The naturally aspirated Lotus 907 and 912 engines from 1977 to 87 utilized the DHLA 45E carburetor in various configurations. Early versions, like those used on the 907, the S1, the S2, featured no power jets and relied on simple but effective tuning with chokes which were sized at 36 millimeters. Now, as the 912 engine evolved, power jets were introduced into the high compression variant.
That would be 1985 to 1987. That was a Eurocar Spec 10. This was done to ensure adequate fueling at higher RPMs, reflecting the engine's increased performance demands. And you can see the differences in the chart on the screen as you move from left to right. What's highlighted is a change from the column to its immediate left. So you can see the changes there as Lotus went to different variations of the DHLA 45E carburetor. All right, let's jump to the next batch of carburetors. These again are from 1980 to 1987. These are turbo cars, so they're all 910 motors. And on the standard compression ratio, 7.5 to 1 from 80 to 87. This was a domestic UK and export car. It had the DHLA 40H, and you can see that there. This is the only time the 40H showed up. And then they went to in 86 and 87, again for domestic UK and export, with a higher compression, 8 to 1. They switched over to the DHLA 45M. This was the first appearance of the 45M. And if you go down the list there, you can see what's inside of that carburetor and how it's different from the others. And then from 1980 to 1987, the ones that came to the US, we had a lower compression ratio, 7.5 to 1. They installed the DHLA 45M. And if you look at this list, you'll see that this carburetor had a power jet in it to provide that extra fuel enrichment at higher RPMs. And then the items highlighted in yellow are different from what was used on the column to the left, which was the 86, 87 Esprit in the UK with 8 to 1 compression. So they changed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items in the carburetor. But from the outside, you can't tell. So you have to open them up and look inside unless you have the tag or the colored dot on the outside of your carburetor. All right, we're on the last group. Let's knock this out. 1988 to 1992. Left-hand side, the 912, naturally aspirated with a compression ratio of 10.9 to 1. This was a DHLA 45D, the first time and the last time the D series carburetor appeared. And this one did have a power jet in it. Looking to the right, the 910, 88 to 92, the turbo, standard compression, 8 to 1. They went back to the DHLA 45M for this series of cars. And you'll see one item highlighted, that's the idle jet emulsion tube. They changed that. And I'm comparing that to the previous chart, which was the 910, 86 to 87, the domestic UK export with the 8 to 1 compression. It is the exact same carburetor used on that car, except for the idle jet emulsion tube. That's the only thing they changed. So because of that, it got its own set of tags and its own set of part numbers. So again, those part numbers and those tags are really just distinguishing features for the specs inside, the specifications that you're going to find inside the carburetor related to the chokes, the emulsion tubes, the jets, etc.
All right, I know. A lot of spreadsheets, a lot of numbers, not very hands-on video. But if you're still listening, hey, thanks for hanging on and watching the video. If you want to download the document for this video, there's a lot of good technical information in there. Just follow the link down in the description. It'll take you to our website. It's on our blog section. You can find it there with some other documents to help folks out there with the Lotus Esprit. So let's wrap this one up, right? Dellorto Carburetors. It wasn't just an option for Lotus to choose Dellorto. It was sort of a necessity because Lotus wanted a company they could work with, and Dellorto was willing to work with them all the way through from the S1 all the way up to the 1992 Lotus Esprit, the last carbureted car, and all the variations in between. And, Lotus was trying to meet emission standards, especially in the US, and maximize performance for the different motors. And Dellorto did that for them. And that's why we have so many different specifications of carburetors for the car, because they're all just a little bit different based on what was happening with emissions and the motor and the compression and everything else. But now you know. You've seen the full spectrum, so you can kind of figure out what you have, what you need, etc. So if you're ready to upgrade your S1 or S2, or maybe even S3, to what Lotus originally intended for your car and maximize the full potential of your car, upgrade to the Dellortos. It's not a big deal. You can still find them. We have them here at Westcan. We have the 45s, we have the 45Es. You can jump on our website, send us a message, and we'll get you what you need. So that is it. If you're thinking about making a change, I would do it. You have nothing to lose but extra horsepower in your car. That was terrible ending. That was terrible ending. No, that didn't make sense. So if you're thinking upgrade, go ahead and do it. All you're going to do is gain horsepower. So, and have a car. Damn it. Why can't I do this? Why would you upgrade? Why would you not upgrade? So if you're ready to drive the car the way Lotus intended that car to be driven and experience that car the way Lotus intended that car to be experienced, it's time to get rid of the Strombergs and find yourself some Dellortos. All right? Okay. Well, till next time, see you later.